Hi, this is Alex, your teen librarian, and in this video I'm going to show you a few different ways that you can put your plushies together. So the main thing that you're going to need other than a needle and some thread is pins. So these pins I currently have in my onigiri. He decided that today was a good day for his acupuncture appointment, so I'm going to have to be pulling these out of this little guy. But just keep them somewhere where they will not roll off your cutting board or your work board and into the carpet where you won't be able to see them, or into you, because they will hurt. Also, if you are participating in our Test Your Character Knowledge, I have these two who have come to supervise. Well, specifically he came to supervise and he followed. So we're going to start with my favorite method of keeping together any sort of fabric, felt, specifically for plushies, which is needle and thread. So I'm sure all of you know how to thread a needle. Knowing how and actually accomplishing it are two different things, but if you have a needle threader, that is great. Otherwise, just do your best to get it through the little tiny eye, pull it through, line up your edges, and then you have it threaded. The harder part is getting your knot at the end. So the easiest way is just to lick your fingers very lightly, roll it around twice, twist it off, and then pull it tight, and that will give you your little knot at the end. Sometimes it comes out kind of big, but if you're putting this underneath your fabric, inside your fabric, you won't see it anyways. So once we have that threaded, I'm going to show you how to do the stitch that I have used for all of my plushies, which is called a blanket stitch. So this is, personally, I think it's the best method to use for attaching two pieces of fabric for a plushie. You can see here, you can kind of see how it's held together along the edge here. I have used that on all of them. It's a little harder to tell here because these two are closed, but you can see a little bit on the cheeks here along his leg how that goes together. So what we do for a blanket stitch is we have our two, you will have your two parts of a pattern. I just have two random pieces of felt right here. We're going to start by putting it on the inside because we want to hide our knot, and then just pull it through until you get to the end. So then the easiest way is, if you can, just hold your pieces together. If you can't hold your pieces together because of the shape, because it's kind of awkward, because you're doing more than two, it's easy to just stick a pin through to hold it in place for you, and then you just have to hold wherever it's most comfortable to, and make sure that you don't poke yourself. So for a blanket stitch, we're going to start by just doing a loop. So we just come around and loop it and pull it tight. So now you can see we have this little loop of thread that goes all the way around. The next stitch, we're going to come a few millimeters, I suppose, over, and just poke it through again on the same side. And then we're going to pull it through, this time not all the way, and you'll see as you pull your thread through it will make a little loop, and we're just going to take that needle and stick it through the loop so it comes through, and then when we pull it tight you'll see that you have like a little across. The first one always comes out diagonal, but then after that you do your next one, pull it through on the same side, and then stick it through your loop, pull it tight. You'll see that you have that little bit over the edge, and that will keep your plushies secure. And then you can just continue along your way, just as many as you need to get all the way around. And then once you reach the end of your, either the end of your thread, if you run out of thread before you reach the end, or the end of your plushie, if you are able to go into the inside of the plushie, for example, if you've just run out of thread, go around and tie your knot in the inside. Otherwise, if we just want to do it on the outside, you just go into one of your last loops, stick your needle under, and just pull it through, and then you're going to put your needle through the loop that forms twice and pull it tight, and you'll see that that makes a tiny little knot. And then you can just snip off your excess thread, and that will hold your fabric secure. So another important tip to remember when you are working with needle and thread is it is very tempting to cut a huge piece of thread because that way you won't have to run out halfway through and knot it and then start over. But don't, please don't. It will knot likely partway through your stitching, and then you'll have to either pick apart the knot or you'll have to cut your line early and potentially have to redo some of the stitching. Keep it, I would say, potentially about this length. This is probably a good 8 inches long. Anything more than this, it might become unruly. And especially if you're new to sewing, it can be a little tricky to make sure you don't get knots in your thread. Even with experience, it happens all the time, trust me. The other type of stitch that you may or may not want to do is just a simple, almost embroidery type stitch. So it's a similar process for if you're using this to attach your pieces of felt or if you're doing embroidery. As we can see here, all of this silver was just done with thread. Actually, on both of them. You can kind of see the detailing on their outfits. And all of that was just done using thread. So how we do that is probably even simpler. Here again, I have 2 pieces just because if you're going to use this to attach your 2 pieces of felt, you want to do it this way also. So for this one, we want to put it on one side. So if you're doing embroidery, you will put the knot on the inside of whatever piece you're embroidering so that you can see the outside and it won't have a little knot there. And this is the easiest way, kind of the basic stitch, is you just go a little bit forward, just push it in, and then pull through, and there's your stitch. If you're doing embroidery, you can just do kind of basic stitches like this, just kind of following whatever shape of embroidery you're doing. If you're not, if you're using it to attach, you can either just kind of go along and just do an every other situation here. So you kind of have like that. If you want to make something crinkled or pleated, it's an easy way of doing that because then you can just pull that tight and it automatically just creates little folds. But a good way of making sure this is extra secure, if this is how you're doing the edges of your plushies, is once you go through, you just backtrack a tiny bit and make your next stitch overlap partway with your previous one. So if we push that through again, you'll see how you have kind of an overlap there of your 2 stitches. It's also easy if you want to make a really long straight line in embroidery, but you don't want it to be potentially wiggling around. So, for example, these long lines here I did with that method. I just kind of cut it about here and did another one to go around because these do continue all the way into the back. And also, if you do this method, it's another way if then you can flip your pattern inside out and you have a relatively invisible seam. You don't have your open seam at the edge. So if you don't like the look of the blanket stitch, this is a good alternative. You just flip whatever your pattern is inside out and it will look a teensy bit neater. So the other methods that you can potentially use to attach your felt is with glue. So if you have a glue gun, I do recommend using a glue gun. It is definitely the easiest. All you would do, for example, if this is the edge of your pattern, you just put a little bit of glue gun along wherever you are working or whatever you want to attach. Push it there, press them together a little bit, and then as soon as it's cooled, you have a pretty well attached seam. So the only bad side of glue gun is that you have to work quick. So you can't do, for example, your entire outline of your plushie because it will dry before you get the chance to attach your pieces. So just work in small bits and work fast. The other thing is you have to be careful not to get your glue too close to the edge, or when you push it together it will squirt out the edge. You can always just go with a pair of scissors and just trim off that extra glue and it looks just fine. If you don't have a glue gun, you can also just use white glue, just white Elmer's glue. So, for example, you would just do kind of the same thing. With the Elmer's glue, you want to be super careful not to get too much on, because obviously it is wet and you need to let it dry. So once you get that on and you push it together, you will notice that these can still be pulled apart. So the trick is that you have to be able to let them sit until it's completely dry. Once it is dry, it will hold together. However, it won't hold nearly as well as either sewing or glue gunning together, so I do recommend either of those more highly if you can. And if possible, if you want to use this method to just attach your pieces so that you can then sew on top of it, that will definitely work too if you don't have pins to hold your pieces together, or maybe if you're just a little nervous about having the pins there in case you poke yourself. Okay, and the final thing that I want to show you is here on No Face you will see that I have attached a keychain. So this is just another type of stitch that you can do. So I'm just going to show you how to do that with a plain old piece of felt. Naturally you could do this, you know, if you wanted to, just on any plushie that you have. So for this, just start with needle and thread, and we're just going to put through your thread however you have it. Obviously, if you're on a completed plushie, you'll just try and put the knot, you know, you just have to accept that the knot is going to be on the outside. If you make it a very small knot, it's probably not going to be noticeable. So here I just have a keychain that I have just laying around. So you'll just kind of hold it together, loop it through the keychain, and this is basically just going to be making loops. So we're going to just push it through and pull it, and you'll see that that just made a little loop that attaches the two together. So we just want to pull that tight, and then you just have to keep going, doing the same thing, just looping it through as many times as you need until you feel that it's secure. Depending on how heavy your keyring or whatever you're using is, it may take quite a few until you are completely sure that it's not going to break, it's not going to fall off. What I did here is at the end I just put a little dab of hot glue and just kind of let it dry there just to make sure that the threads didn't fray or anything like that. So that is the basics of how to attach your plushies together. So this can be used on any pattern that you have. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in the next one.